All right, so our next session is going to help us take a step back and take stock of the big trends that will shape communications in 2024.
Lara Dobson, our head of product marketing at Staffbase, will lead a discussion with a panel of experts about the key developments in the communications sector and how they will shape the future of communications. The panel includes Frank Wolf, Chief Strategy Officer at Staffbase, Sharn Kleiss, Strategy Partner, Employee Experience and Insights at Gallagher, and Phifer, President and CEO at TACLE Advisory. Let's hear from the panel now.
Thanks, Athena and Zeke. And welcome to our State of the Space session today. My name is Lara Dobson. I'm a Vice President of Product Marketing at Staffbase. And we have talked so much about the topic of inspiration today. So we're hoping that with this session, we're going to be able to present some insights, some trends that'll inspire your work. We have put together a report now, a State of the Space report, of things that we find to be kind of decisive for the industry or notable, or maybe just food for thought. And so this session actually is a little bit of a precursor to a session we're going to be doing on June 13th, which I'm excited to announce. We're going to be doing our inaugural kind of State of the Space report launch. So mark your calendar. That's going to be a virtual session where I'll dive into each of 8 trends in depth, discuss them, give practical examples, etc. What we've done today is we're really excited to have been able to invite a panel of experts actually whose research and insights have inspired some of the trends that show up in that report. So we're going to give a preview. We're going to do a deep dive into 3 of the trends from the report, and then we're going to give a teaser of 3 of the other ones, get some hot takes from some of our experts. And we'll be hoping that you'll join us then on June 13th as well. So for our experts today, we have, first of all, Sharn Kleiss. Sharn is a strategy lead at Gallagher. So if you've looked at the Gallagher State of the Space report, Sharn has taken a leading role in developing that report. So we're really excited to have her here with us today. We have Frank Wolf, who you've heard speak earlier today as well, and you'll know has spent, the past year doing research into narrative and really defining that. And so he'll give us some insights as well. And then we have Phifer, who brings with him 25 years of experience advising some of the largest organizations on their tech strategies, also in the area of employee communications and employee experience. And so we're so excited to have the experts with us today, and let's jump into the session. Okay, so thank you so much for joining today. I'm so excited to have the conversation with you all. I guess we can jump right in already to trend number 1. I think to frame this one up a little bit, last year when we were talking about this topic, there were so many unknowns. And I think there were a lot of communicators out there that, had just sort of started seeing what was happening with generative AI, but hadn't dove in themselves. And that changed a lot this year. So we know, from Gallagher that there's a large portion of communicators that started experimenting with AI already, that they're also 3 times more likely to believe that it will help reduce their workload if they've been experimenting with it. But we also know that the practical use cases behind it aren't super well understood. There's some skepticism or, just questioning there in terms of how will this actually be a practical use to me? So we want to talk a little bit about, kind of what causes that discrepancy. And maybe, Sharn, you could start us off. More communicators than ever are using it, but not everyone says it's useful. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, great question. And as you hit on there, it wouldn't be 2024 if we weren't talking about AI. And so every year Gallagher puts out the State of the Sector report, which looks at sort of those trends in the internal communication space. And we started to ask people late last year, what were they feeling about AI? And what was fascinating, it was about 50-50 split of sort of positive sentiment versus negative sentiment. But actually, the more you use AI, the more positive you feel about it. That said, there does seem to be this sort of trend, right, across the data that neutrality and uncertainty reduces with usage or plan for usage. And I think that is the more you use AI, the more you realize the use case maybe isn't quite there yet. So you probably feel a little bit safe and secure in your job after running some copy through ChatGPT and getting back quite sort of mediocre words. And so this sense that it's not taking my job yet. And as you alluded to there in some of the findings, that people were really excited about how it would reduce their workloads, but that was more about sort of the admin tasks and the drudgery of the day-to-day of like making my PowerPoint, quicker, or like pulling out that data quicker. It wasn't about the craft of communications. And so it was more about sort of solving for the everyday work rather than improving what gets to the employee. And I think now we're starting to see this shift in looking ahead beyond that kind of initial personal use case of, I'm a communicator, how can it help me in my role, to actually, how is this going to change and shape the organization? And what is the kind of governance that needs to be in place? And how are we preparing our people for the future that is going to be so heavily shaped by AI? So some fascinating data coming out there.
Yeah. No, this is very, very, very interesting. Yeah, it's on the one hand side, I think, thinking about how can it fit within the context of my role and bringing in some of that role-based contextualization. On the other side, keeping kind of the organizational perspective in mind. Frank, I mean, you had just hit on this kind of in your last answer around the audience centricity. I want to ask, how do you think that AI can actually add value with this role-based contextualization side of things, and how could some of those more like audience-centric AI use cases look like, and what insights could they deliver for communications?
Yeah, I think today we think about generative AI mostly from a sending perspective, right? So if you think about communications, it's about do a draft for me, or I research a topic in the beginning, or one prompt that I love to use a lot. I say fix grammar and style, or fix grammar. So that's really helpful. But AI, I sometimes compare it, it's like a very smart new colleague coming to your team on a Monday morning. So with a lot of knowledge of the world and everything else, but not a lot of knowledge about your audience in the company, right? And that's the thing where we're saying, how can we teach this to AI? And technically speaking, how can we give this as context? And that's the insight that we found is, of course, we know things about our audience. Like if I have a specific audience, I say, these are frontline workers in our Arizona plant. I already know a few things, and I can also understand over time, what is the news, the communication that they received in the past? What are key narratives that they experienced? Maybe we acquired this plant 2 years ago, and they have this narrative of, we have been acquired. We had to adopt a new culture. For an AI, that's a quite interesting information to help me draft better messages to these people, right? So our idea is to say, how can we capture more information about our target audiences and feed it to AI as a context? So the new colleague is not somebody who comes on a Monday morning, and actually it will be every day like a Monday morning, but the new colleague AI feels like he or she has been there for 10 years already and knows everything that happened, right? So that's the idea, to expand the context windows of the AI and really make it more helpful in the end-to-end day of comms.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there. I mean, from a role-based perspective, and then also, so many unknowns still. So it's kind of like last year there was, we started at a place of a lot of unknowns, and now we've arrived at a place of more knowns, but still some unknowns. I think definitely as a takeaway from our side, and one thing that I saw with this trend was certainly a feeling of moving from, AI as the absolute Wild West towards more of a business as usual. How can I actually incorporate and start adding value using this technology? So I think for communications audience out there, it's the identification of those clear kind of low stakes use cases, I guess. One other observation that we had was the ability to use AI with those more low stakes use cases, or to complete mundane tasks where there's less risk attached to it as well, frees up and helps free up time for them to work on more innovative tasks, and creative ones as well. So AI from Wild West to business as usual. That brings us already to then trend number 3, which is have the courage to look in the mirror, which has a little bit of mystery behind it, which I will uncover in our State of the Space webinar in a little bit more depth on June 13th. But we want to talk about this trend, and it's actually about, might not be super obvious from the outside, but this trend is actually about metrics, measurement, that whole thing. I think it's a topic you very seldom attend a communications conference where this is not discussed. I think we've talked today already about, new metrics that are out there to measure communications connected to more business impact, new tools that are available to do that, new data that's available through AI. And I really think that we're at an inflection point when it comes to the topic of measurement, especially when we think about bringing in more of that business perspective and actually having the data to go and, make that connection these days. So I've seen obviously recently the Gallagher report kind of point out a discrepancy also between the metrics that communications professionals are measuring today or using as an indicator of success versus those that we aspire to, I suppose. So Sharn, maybe you can start us off and talk to us a little bit about that gap between what's being measured today and where we could be going, and what you think is important for communicators to kind of consider when defining new metrics to measure themselves against moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And as you say, we're always talking about measurement, and it's so key to being that sort of strategic communicator. And that's one of the things that came out of this year's report, is that strategic communicators measure better. But, it's a great idea to sort of roll back and think about what is the purpose of internal communications in your organization? So what are we here to do before you even start measuring anything? And that's a question we ask in State of the Sector. And we saw, the top two purposes for communications is culture and belonging, supporting that, and then also driving strategic alignment. So if that's what you're there to do, you would then hope that you are measuring the awareness of the strategy and somehow measuring culture and belonging, which is a little bit trickier. But what was really contentious in this year's report was that the number one KPI that communicators were held to account for was employee engagement, which is quite, a little bit unfair because there's so many things that go into, we talked about the employee experience earlier, IT, HR, all of these things feed into how an employee feels engaged at work. And if that is our key, performance indicator as a communicator, what are all the other measures that go into building that and bolstering that? And so when we look at what are communicators actually measuring, we did see people are measuring more across the last year. The barrier to measuring is still sort of time and resource, which is, evergreen challenge for communicators. But that kind of technology piece of having the tech that not only gives you the statistics and the metrics that you need, but also that collates and analyzes them. And so it's quite easy to measure reach, but then less easy. And as we see sort of a drop off, we've got reach, then understanding, then behavior change, and then satisfaction with communications. And so we're kind of measuring the easy things. And what we're using that measurement for is often to kind of prove our worth to the business. So we're using that measurement data to prove a return on investment before we're using it to improve the employee experience. So, 70% of communicators are evidencing ROI, and then fewer are refining their channels or tailoring their content or adjusting messaging off the back of it. So there's a bit of a gap between what we're measuring, what we're held to account for, but also what are we using that measurement to try and achieve. And so few organizations have kind of connected, if our goal is engagement, what does that mean for the business? Is it productivity? Is it discretionary effort? And is anyone measuring those things to then compare? So, we talked about Wild West before. Measurement is a bit of a Wild West still, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm really glad though also that you bring up that the ROI discussion as well. I think this is a really interesting one. It's actually one I was at a Gartner conference about 2 weeks ago, and they had kind of announced the shift from ROI, like when it comes to employee experience, from ROI to ROE, return on employee, and the focus on some of those more experience-based metrics. Maybe Jean, being an expert in that space, what do you think that communications can learn from the advancement of measurement, also in the employee experience movement? And how might you even consider kind of measurement as it relates to other areas of the business?
Sure. I've got a fairly simple equation I like to use. EX leads to employee engagement, which leads to happy employees, which leads to employee retention and higher levels of productivity and quality. But it all starts with EX. That's kind of where the beginning is. But the end game is, how much money am I going to make? How many, what's the quality level of my products? What's my churn rate of my employees? That's the end game that we are looking for. That's the outcome we're trying to get our arms around. There's not always a straight line there, and many times it's hard to find the correlation, but that is the goal of looking at the right measurements and seeing how to apply them to the business metrics. There are a lot of measurements out there, right? There are access metrics, there's social metrics, collaboration metrics, content metrics, the depth of consumption, read frequency, search terms, things like that. I've got this whole relatively new area called employee analytics that gives me a whole new set of data points to look at to try to get my arms around the employee set and the employee experience. Other more outcome-related metrics, things like intent to stay, absenteeism, employee turnover, those are all metrics that I see a lot of folks using. I see a lot of organizations also consolidating those metrics into a single number. Many times they call that an EX index, right? And they use this EX index to kind of keep it front and center, in front of the employees, in front of the leadership team, in front of the board. Many times they publish this EX index in their annual reports. Because they want to use that to relay the state of the employees, if you will. And the EX index is comprised of lots of little numbers. You can't look at one big number and understand every aspect. You have to look under the hood at the little numbers, but having that big number in front of everybody all the time, which will constantly remind them of the state of the employees in the organization, I think that can be very, very important.
I think it's interesting that you bring up the EX index as sort of a mixture of different metrics put together to be one omni metric. I think it's an interesting idea, especially if we look towards that business impact direction. Maybe a question for you, Frank, if you had to pick one metric of the future for communications, what do you think it would be and why?
I don't think we have an hour for me now to respond. I wanna challenge this a bit, and we said before, mostly employee communications is measured on engagement. And Jean, you just said like this EX, there's a big indicator for this, and we could have different measurements around this. The point is, the moment we connect ourselves to these very wide measurements, it's a great way to also not have responsibility, because you can, and that's a totally fair point, you can say there are so many factors influencing this, and communications is just a part of it. It's an important part, it's just a part. And what I love in terms of measurement, if you ask me, where's a discipline that really nailed measurement in the past years, I would say it's marketing. And marketing has found a concept and a language to say, let's not measure vanity metrics, as they call it. Let's really measure call to action. Let's introduce a concept like pipeline. Let's really link to sales. And of course, marketing cannot measure everything. But the basis for this is they pretty much say, let's not lie to ourselves. And let's not sugarcoat things. Let's really try to measure our impact. And what they did based on that is pretty much, let's skip 90% of what we are doing because it doesn't have impact, and focus on the last 10%. Look at large companies today, at how they spend their marketing budget. It's just a few things. It's amazingly few things. And they say no to everything else. And because communication is not doing this, communication does too many things, too many initiatives, says yes too many times. And I would say, pick something. If you ask me right now, I would say, pick the key narratives that you want to drive, where you want to change how people think, where you want to change people's mind. Pick these narratives and measure them, and really focus on them and say no to everything else. That would be my answer to this. And that's the only way to really become a strategic part of company. In all other ways, you are part of the big, employee engagement modeling through complex that's around there, and that's a real challenge.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it's the selecting of the right metric at the end of the day, and maybe that is a little bit of the risk that comes into play with some of the more business impact centric metrics, or what we look to do there is looking and thinking really hard about what is it actually at the end of the day that I also drive and have some control over? And then on the flip side of that, once you do nail that down, being courageous, looking for the truth, in the service of then being able to say no to certain things, even if looking at that truth is kind of scary at the beginning.
And it's clear, you're right, and it's clear if you nailed it down and say, like, I don't have the big thing, I have this one, but that's something you have to deliver then on, right? But to be honest, that's what marketing really does. Like, and I love the point before, let's measure to improve our work in the first place. And the second place is to prove our work to others. But what marketing really nailed is we measure to do a better job.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. A lot to take away from there. Great conversation. I think we want to slowly move into the direction of we wanted to do a deep dive on 3 of those different trends and get your opinions. We also have 3 other trends that we want to look at, but just briefly, and have asked each of you to prepare kind of your hot take on one of the trends. So we'll start off with Frank. Shaking up storytelling. So what this trend is about is, we're living in a time where we have increasingly this fight for employee attention. We have more channels, we have complexity, we've talked about information overload and competition also for that employee attention. So that, and then that coupled with, I guess, the challenge of engaging with a completely new generation who has really different expectations when it comes to consumption of content and tone of voice and transparency and things like that. So I think today communicators have to ask themselves a lot, how do I make content more engaging? What are people looking for in that content? And how can I compete for and win attention? So Frank, what do you think in your hot take is the frontier in engaging content?
Yeah, I looked into a report that I really like, and it's the TikTok Trend Report 2024. And they identified 3 sort of different trends for that. And number 1 is curiosity peaked. And this pretty much means in order to cut through, in order to be relevant, in order to cut through the noise, you have to be braver than other brands. You have to do surprising things, and you have to find new angles about your brand, about your business that you want to talk about. And the core idea is what's a very unique aspect of your business that you can talk about and that you can rediscover together with your audience. Maybe you need to be brave for that. Maybe it's unconventional, but that's exactly the goal of cutting-edge storytelling. The second one is storytelling unhinged. That's pretty much take all the expectations that people have about your brand and how you tell stories and flip them on its head, right? Maybe you start with the end in mind. Maybe you tell different stories at the same time, and a lot of complexity on how your characters evolve. TikTok is a great place to understand what's going on there, and there's an unimaginable level of creativity out there right now. So a lot of things to be tried. And the last point is bridging the trust gap. And feel here is that brands are really struggling to keep building trust with their audiences. And it's not about just going to TikTok or other platforms and selling things as a one-off thing, but really establishing a connection to your audience, establish connection to influencers, and also build authority in a certain area where you say, we have the best data in the industry. We have really good insights in the industry, and we keep sharing this with our audience all the time, and we show them we are relevant, we care about their topics. I would say we care about their core narratives and core ideas of our audience. So highly relevant, and only a big recommendation from my side to check out this report.
Great. Thanks, Frank. I think nobody will be mad about the recommendation to perhaps scroll TikTok as part of learning for their job, discovering new trends to potentially build on. Super interesting. Thanks. I will switch then quickly over to trend number 5, which is a look into the tech future. I think we know also from the basis of different conversations we've had at this conference, tech is everywhere, and it has always been complex to introduce new tech into an organization, but the pace of development today is just increasing. And this poses actually a really new challenge for, the group that is joining us today for communicators, because historically, if you think about it, communicators have used technologies from other areas of the organization. So maybe it's the email tool for marketing, or, the collaboration suite for the company intranet. So we've had to think a lot less about tech and tech challenges in the past, but now we see this wave of CommsTech essentially coming towards us, where we have to be more aware than ever about what's happening out there. And so I asked Jean to give us a hot take, with those decades of experience in advising organizations and helping leaders understand how and where to deploy new technologies. How do you think that communicators can plug into that increasing number of trends and also evaluate actually what matters most?
Yeah. This is the fun part of a research analyst job. When Gartner hires new people, they issue them a laptop, a mobile phone, and a crystal ball, right? Because that's a big part of what an analyst job is, to look into the future, to try to understand what's going on out there. There are a lot of tools that I used to use as a Gartner analyst that I still use, but there are tools that your listeners can use as well. Word clouds, they're great. They're an interesting way to array information, but there are a lot of other resources out there. I bucket them into three major categories: reports, third parties, and your own resources. On the report side, you've got tools like hype cycle reports, technology radar reports, again, coming out of the big research houses like Gartner, Forrester, IDC, et cetera. You've got search trend reports to see what people are looking for. You also, at the end of the year, tend to see things like future of, or state of, or prediction. Those kind of things are the keywords to look for. Third parties, I mentioned the large analyst firms like Gartner, et cetera. But also there are many smaller, more focused analyst groups that may be more appropriate for what you're trying to do. They may be focused on your industry segment, for example, or maybe the particular use cases you're trying to get your arms around. And also, don't forget about the vendors, right? Your vendors have a vision of the future. They understand their perspective of the industry they're in, and they also have a vision for their technology, their applications. So you already pay for their stuff. You might as well pick their brain and get information from your vendors about where they see things going. There's finally your own resources. You have a ton of resources in your organization that you can leverage to get a good handle on the future. So, for example, if you have a chief technology officer group or an R&D organization, they are tasked with looking at the future of your products and services, and looking at the future of the industries that you play in. You might have skunkworks going on, trying a lot of little experiments out there, tinkering with new stuff. Best practice groups, especially if you're a large distributed global type organization. But also look at the new folks that came in, new hires, college hires, interns. They got to tinker with new cool stuff. They got to play with some really cool toys. And a lot of those cool toys will wind up being production tools in your organization. So go out and find those folks that came in, pick their brains as well. They have a lot of really good ideas, many of which will work well in your organization. And finally, you have to think about risk. You can't look at new technology without understanding the risk of adopting that technology. So if you have a risk assessment group, you got to talk to those guys. You got a legal group. Everybody's got a legal somehow, right? You got to talk to those guys, because everything that you pick from a tech future perspective has got to be cast from a risk perspective, especially as we're in this world of AI, where there still is a fair amount of risk to deal with.
Great. Thank you. I love the idea of talking to new hires and pulling in some of those insights from new generations. This is something I notice in my own team as well. We have some younger members of the team, I'll say, that come in with new and different ideas. So great. Also love the idea of talking to vendors about trends. I think that's something at Staffbase, especially as it relates to technology. There's a back and forth of learning that happens there that can be very fruitful. Thank you, Jean. Great. Then we have arrived at our last hot take, and this one's going to be for Sharn. Authenticity wins the day is our sixth trend. And I think, throughout the conference, we've kind of been buzzing with topics around polarization, trust, fight for truth, some of those words like transparency as well. And we have this great call to action also behind the conference, which is aspire to inspire. I think we've looked at a lot of different tactics and tools throughout the day, also to be able to address that. But I think there's also one movement and one important movement that we can't ignore as kind of a backdrop to all of that. And that's, the conversation around authenticity. So we're looking at a generation today who sees through everything and who has a real hunger for honesty and realness and authentic content. And so, Sharn, maybe for you, in a world where trust is a really, important commodity, I guess, what's the next step for leaders and communicators to take to be able to protect that trust and, communicate authentically?
Yeah, for sure. I think, so my hot take very much is that I think we're going to see leaders showing up in new ways, particularly you just talk about younger leaders coming through the business, but in the State of the Sector report, we saw that leadership visibility increased as a priority this year. And in case you hadn't heard, and Jean was talking about the future, but it's already here. If you missed it, we now have the world's first AI CEO. It's for a Polish rum company called Dictador. But I mean, it makes me feel slightly uneasy that we now have this in our world. But I think perhaps because we have that expectation of leaders to be human and empathetic. And funnily enough, this AI CEO, Micah, even talks about emphasizing empathy and to realize that human potential. So even the AI CEO is talking about that authenticity and empathy piece, sort of in this interview with Peak Magazine. But as employees, we want to know what a leader's personal opinion is too. And you were talking about that kind of divisiveness of the world today. Edelman Trust Barometer found that 2/3 of employees expect the CEO to speak publicly about controversial issues. And we know that when leaders communicate in a way that is transparent and straight talking, they're more trusted. And that high trust then is linked to increased profitability and employee engagement. I mean, we were talking about those measures before. But CEOs and leaders are more vulnerable than ever, particularly against this sort of backdrop of AI and, what could be fake and what could be real. They're under this pressure to take a public stance on societal issues, and they're turning to comms for support. Because so much now internal is external and external is internal. And I think comms professionals are going to need to step up and take that proactive approach with leaders to help them navigate challenging times. And so that critical role for developing communicators to not only be the voice of an organization's people to the C-suite, but also to help the voice of the leaders themselves, not just internally, but externally. And that, very much what Frank was saying about narratives, so helping to shape that narrative that then the leader will be visible in, embedding throughout the organization and the world. So really this sort of great way for communicators to gain that seat at the table is to be that kind of leader for the leaders on communications.
Yeah, amazing. I think there's such an opportunity there, right? Especially with having those internal channels, there's communications professionals have a lot of control actually to shape what the experience there is like and to be able to make really strategic decisions about, what is that going to be like for people, and do we choose to have an authentic communication strategy and stuff like that. So great. Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of our little state of the space short dive in and preview as to what's to come in terms of trends. I so appreciate all of you having joined. Obviously, your research and thought leadership has inspired also a lot of what's gone into that report. And so thank you. Join us as well. I guess also the call to action. We're really happy for any of those in the audience to join us on June 13th when we'll do a deep dive into this report, or I'll take us through every single trend in a little bit more depth, a lot of practical examples. That's it. Then back to Athena and Zeke.
That was a really great session. Really looking forward to the State of the Space webinar launching on June 13th. I'm definitely circling that on my calendar. A big thank you to Lara and the team for that amazing session.